So thank you very much, Joseph, for organizing this. Yeah, since I'm the first one to speak on the Philippines, I'm Janina Dannenberg. I work for IPON International Peace Observers. I'm based in Germany, actually in Hamburg. And yeah, since I'm the first one to talk about the Philippines, I will give you some general information about the Philippines and about the peace and conflict setting there. And after that, I will introduce the background of my organization, IPON, some basic facts, and how we support the engagement for human rights and peace. So from prehistoric time onwards, people from different surrounding areas already lived in the Philippines and moved there, and the area became an increasingly important for international trading. But from the end of the 16th century, it was a Spanish colony. It was colonized by Spain. Later, due to a liberation movement and the Spanish-American War in 1898, it became an American colony. Both colonial times, the Spanish one and the US time, are still visible today in the Philippines, in the culture and in everyday life. So also the social issues that are relevant today and the ecological issues have a lot to do with the colonial time. After World War II, the Philippines became a presidential democracy, which later turned into a dictatorship under Ferdinand Marcos in the 1970s and 1980s. After a peaceful revolution in 1986, a series of democratic governments was elected and handled great social and economic problems in kind of different ways. And I think what Roy just said in his speech about the shrinking democracies in the world, I think Philippines is also one of them. We have a few years under Rodrigo Duterte are behind us, and now it's the new president is the son of the former dictator Marcos. So when it comes to social ecological issues, I would just name a few, and this is first and foremost the unequal land distribution in the Philippines. Huge portions of the land belong to very few elite families. There have been many agrarian reforms that try to redistribute land, but they were not completely implemented, or the success was very limited so far. But of course, there are also successes in land distribution that farmers have been fighting for. Then there are conflicts around environmental resources. The Philippines is very rich in resources. For example, gold mining, copper mining are huge issues. The point is that the areas where these resources are mostly indigenous peoples' areas, ancestral domains of indigenous peoples who hold pre-colonial land rights there, and that should be consulted before doing any kind of mining activities there. And there are huge conflicts about that also. Then the political system has great problems with corruption. For example, the justice system is very weak. Impunity is a very pervasive problem. Prosecution takes very long, and also lawsuits take very long. But the Philippines have a very strong civil society and a very strong social movement. But under the movement and the civil society is very much under the pressure of state repressions. Their spaces are shrinking. I will talk about that later. And of course, there are armed conflicts in the Philippines. That's why we are here today. When we talk about peace, that's also often about armed conflicts, right? So on one hand, we have the conflict around the autonomy of Muslim regions in southern Philippines and Mindanao. These go back to the policies of putting settlers there, largely ignoring that there were Muslim people living already in that areas. And also during the martial law, there were just very few spaces for democratic participation and for like rejecting this in a democratic way. So the struggle had to become violent. Today, there is a peace contract, and we have a phase of transitional governance that recently has been extended until 2025. So at the moment, an autonomous Muslim region is to be built there. But of course, there are still many weapons in the area, religious and ideological prejudices, feuds, hostilities, and the socioeconomic and political problems in the Bangsamoro, that's the name of the region, cannot be solved overnight. So there's still, you cannot really call it peace at the moment. And then the second one is the conflict around the armed insurgency of the NDF, the National Democratic Front in the Philippines. I'm not going to talk much about that because that's what the speaker from the Philippines will talk about. There has been a communist insurgency for decades already. At the moment, the government tries to keep it small through localized approaches, but most civil society groups call for peace negotiations on a centralized level. Also, the Action Network Human Rights in the Philippines, this is where my organization, IPON, is a member of. And connected to this is the so-called war against terrorism, which the last government called out, and which goes along with, for example, the red tagging of any kind of activists or any kind of people that are politically active. Red tagging means, so I'll talk about red tagging later shortly anyway. The spaces for shrinking society, for civil society are shrinking, it's shrinking. So, and then there is another armed conflict in a way, even though it has only one side that is armed, and that is the so-called war on drugs. It's actually a war against poor. The last president, Rodrigo Duterte, called out to kill any kind of drug dealers and drug users. And this framework was also used to kill people that other people just wanted to get rid of. So some organizations say that there are up to 30,000 people shot already in that, under that frame or in that context. Of course, the official numbers are much higher, but these are also a few thousand deaths that the government even would say that killed them. So what's the role of IPON in this? IPON stands for International Peace Observers Network. So what we are using is the instrument actually of human rights observation. So if we're doing human rights observation, why is it Peace Observers Network? It's because of the strong nexus actually of peace and human rights. On one hand, the ignorance of human rights violations can be a root cause of violent conflicts. This applies for civil and political as well as for economic, social, and cultural rights. In the Philippine case, for example, the heavy discrimination against Muslim population and indigenous peoples that has been taking place for such a long time is producing an armed conflict, and it's a human rights problem that is behind that. and the state repression and the martial law caused the oppressed in Mindanao to go for armed forms of resistance, because in general you can say if people do not have no space to fight for their right in a non-violent way, they would use violence in the end. And when it comes to indigenous peoples, their rights to land and their rights to cultural integrity often is violated. So, and all in all, many of the socio-economical concerns that also the land distribution issues, for example, that kind of feed the communist insurgency, actually they are related to economic and social rights. So strengthening human rights on a local level would prevent conflicts from growing. And this is actually what the human rights defenders in the Philippines do, that IPON also works with, that are, for example, indigenous peoples that are trying to fight for self-determination of their ancestral domain, like our partner group Padata, or farmers that keep on fighting for land reform, for land distribution, for the right to food, for the right to land. These are all human rights defenders, and in practice, they contribute to the prevention of more armed conflict through their political work. At the same time, human rights violations are also an effect of violent conflicts. In each and every conflict, I think, in the world, human rights are abused and violated. Therefore, in conflict settings, it's needed to advocate for the respect of human rights. And this is, for example, what in the Philippines, in the context of the so-called war on drug, what people and organizations do, that they fight against extrajudicial killings, against the killing of drug users. Yeah, and IPON is also trying to help to make the work of these human rights defenders, of these people, more secure. All these politically active human rights defenders that IPON works together with, they have one in common, and that's the fact that they actually face heavy repression. Increasingly, human rights defenders face harassment, criminalization. They are confronted with trumped-up charges. There is a new legislation against terrorism in the Philippines that makes it possible that any person that are active in civil society, no matter if they have any connection to violent groups or not, can be jailed. It's very dangerous now in the Philippines to show political commitment in any way at the moment. And what I said before, the phenomena behind many repressions, including the many killings of activists, is the so-called red tagging or red baiting. That's the act of labeling or branding, naming, and accusing individuals or organization of being like left-leaning, subversives, communists, terrorists. And this is used as a strategy by state agents, particularly law enforcement agencies and the military, against those people that they perceive to be threats or enemies of the state, even though they are probably just NGO workers, whatever. If people get red tagged, life can become very dangerous for them. Our speaker from the Philippines today will have another focus in his talk, I think, but even in the academe, it happens that people get red tagged with restrictions, which restricts somehow also the academic freedom, or also liberation theologists or some church movements. They also face a lot of red tagging. It's really a challenge to be politically active in the Philippines today. However, in some cases where human rights defenders are under threat, international human rights observation, that is what IPON does, can be supportive. Yeah, this is what we do actually. Upon request of human rights defenders, we do trial observation visits in prison, accompaniment to police or other state actors, or the observation of rallies. We document human rights violation and bring cases to state actors in the Philippines or to international institutions. What kind of action is needed? We would decide like very specific on a case-to-case basis. Our goal is to contribute to the safety of the human rights defenders in the Philippines, so therefore to the safety of people and organizations that support peace. We do never intervene in the conflict of the human rights defenders itself, and we never intervene in their strategies as long as they don't use violence. Our only goal is to broaden their spaces for engagement. And with this approach, we make sure that even unequal power relations cannot lead to programmatic influences of ours. On the international level, we try to use existing instruments of power to support local initiatives for human rights, for peace, for justice, and for social change. So that's it actually from IPON. We have not worked together with the organization where the Philippine speaker Regleto comes from. So I'm very excited what he will be telling us today about the struggle for peace and for peace negotiation he is involved. Thank you very much.